Welcome to the first ever PWI virtual roundtable. I'm editor-in-chief Kevin McElvaney. I am here with 4 PWI writers, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that's really a hot button issue right now, and that's the concept of cinematic matches in pro wrestling, kind of what they mean for the future of wrestling. I'd like to get right into it, so I'm just going to introduce everybody and sort of allow them to introduce themselves, I guess. So first up, we have contributing writer Brady Hicks.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
We have contributing writer Mike Bessler.
Hey, good to see everybody. Hi, guys.
Very, very dark room there, Mike.
I'll work on it. It's mood lighting.
He has very, very dark thoughts, so appropriate.
And then right there we have senior writer Al Castle.
Hi, everyone. This is all about safety and not at all about disguising my identity.
Take your word for it. And then finally we have contributing writer and co-host of the PWI podcast with Al Castle, Brian Solomon.
Hey, wrestling fans.
It's very awkward for me to introduce people. I don't think I've ever had to do that before in my life. I mean, in that way, the evening news kind of way. So, I mean, let's get into it. I know we all have some different opinions on this topic of cinematic matches. They're not new. We have to acknowledge that right off the bat. This has been a thing to some degree in wrestling for years, many years. And then more popular in more recent years with the Matt Hardy final deletion, all that sort of thing. I mean, let's start with the dissenting view. I know we had some harsh feedback on Twitter the night of, both nights of WrestleMania. So I'm going to call on Al here to talk about what happened there. Were you really caught off guard by this response that you got?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it blows my mind that mine is the dissenting view. I mean, when, and I think it's one of the interesting things about not having a crowd at wrestling is that it is more difficult to gauge in real time what people's reactions are. But I was maybe less so on the Boneyard match. Absolutely, with the Firefly Funhouse, I was sure everyone was going to hate it as much as I hated it, and was blown away that it went over as well as it did. And the first thing that I'll say, and to some extent I'm speaking to the folks on Twitter, we could all have differing opinions, and that's cool. Honestly, I mean, I couldn't disagree more with folks who like this stuff, but that's cool. Different strokes for different folks. No reason to be disrespectful to anyone who has a differing point of view. But this whole weekend really has been fascinating to me in terms of really illustrating the changing tastes in wrestling fans. And like I told Brian on the podcast, I really feel like this was the week that I was kind of left behind. And it becomes clear that I am not the target generation of wrestling fans right now.
Right. So actually so Brady was also live tweeting both nights of WrestleMania, and we've learned that that's very confusing for people. So we're probably not going to do that going forward.
Yeah.
We kind of alternate. Brady's opinion was a little more forgiving toward the Boneyard match, and probably felt pretty similar to the way you did about the Firefly match. So Brady, like, what was your reaction to it?
I was a little Mets with the entire thing. I mean, the Boneyard match, I recognized the limitations that they had kind of going into it as far as the Undertaker and, you know, what he'd be able to do against somebody the caliber of AJ Styles and everything that he's able to pull off in the ring. I'm sure that the audience not being there played a part for sure. I was forgiving of it because, to me, a lot of times you have to suspend disbelief with an Undertaker match anyway. So I went along with it. I thought it was very well done for what it was. The Firefly Funhouse stuff blew me away because, and it was interesting. Believe me, it was funny. There were parts of it that I enjoyed, but they advertised it as a match, and I think that's where it kind of bugged me because it wasn't a match. There wasn't really a winner. It was very psychological, and it was full of all these inside jokes that, honestly, and maybe I'm stupid, but I didn't get everything that they were doing. I got a lot of it, but I didn't get everything. So I can't imagine that all these internet fans that were so upset that people wouldn't like it, that they got everything, because I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. It was definitely a divisive thing. I enjoyed personally the Boneyard match a lot more than the Firefly match, although I liked part of parts of the Firefly match. There were times when I thought this is pure wrestle crap. I think I texted that to one of my friends. Like, this is total fodder for the Wrestle Crap website, and it'll be inducted one day. But then there were moments like, oh, okay, this is kind of trippy and cool, and I like elements of what they're doing. Again, not a wrestling match in the traditional sense, but like, I love David Lynch movies, and I mean, even the weird third season of Twin Peaks that a lot of people hated, I thought was great. So I like stuff like that, but it is not something I'm used to seeing in wrestling. One person I know who enjoyed this, actually. So Mike, you picked this for the PWI Weekly email newsletter, cheap plug, link in the description to sign up. We all picked our best and worst matches and a one-word review to describe WrestleMania as a whole. You picked the Firefly Funhouse match as your favorite match of both nights. So talk about that a little bit.
I did, and just to pull the curtain back a little bit, I did not read the assignment properly, so I started out writing like a 350-word essay on why I disliked the Goldberg Braun Strowman match, and then Kevin kind of reeled me in before I wrote like another magnum opus on the Firefly fun match. And when I sent it in with that, I actually put parenthetically, sorry, not sorry. But the formatting for the email was pretty tight. I understand. I felt like it was the man trying to keep me down and not put my opinion out there because it didn't make the final one. But you did put Firefly Funhouse in there as my favorite match. It was the most enjoyable for me. I have seen a number of people kind of in the Al Castle camp, where there's kind of a sky is falling kind of thing. Like, if this is the future of wrestling, I'm out. And I like, these are friends of mine who are saying I'm going to cancel the network if they don't get it together, if they do more of this stuff.
Sure.
I think things have to change. It's kind of like a lot of other industries that are learning that they have to have a different way forward temporarily during the coronavirus, but the toothpaste is out of the tube after this is over. So
right.
Things like cinematic matches, we're going to see more of them. We've seen stuff like that. We've been seeing little things, kind of like you mentioned at the beginning, Kevin, for years. Just, I think on the scale that it was presented this way, and again, Al's pretty smart, pretty astute guy, is a true wrestling aficionado. I can appreciate why somebody might go, what is this? I didn't think that I was supposed to be seeing this. Now we know, though, and I think we should be ready to see more of this kind of thing. In some respects, just to go back on the Boneyard match for a minute, and I think I mentioned this on a personal Facebook page, this is, and we all do this. We're all wrestling fans. So we've been booking our own matches for years, whether it's with our own imaginary feds or WWE dream matches or whatever. I have imagined matches, quote unquote, like the Boneyard match before. So it didn't bother me to see that one. I was like, what am I seeing? This is really something. Firefly Funhouse match, I think, Kevin, you used the word trippy. That's what it was. And I liked having something trippy to watch.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. If you wanted something trippy, it was absolutely trippy. So like that did scratch a certain itch as far as that's concerned. Al, I think by presidential debate rules, you're entitled to do a rebuttal here, but I want to get over to Brian first, just because he's been sitting very politely and not saying anything yet. Yep, very good, very good. Don't know whether it will pop up in the recording, but Brian made a very innocent little pose, and he's being a good boy over there.
For once.
So Brian, I know from listening to the PWI podcast recap of WrestleMania that you also were not fond of the show, but particularly these two matches. And one thing that kind of stuck out with me as far as all this goes is that in another context, you might like this kind of thing, but on a wrestling show, you didn't. So could you elaborate a little bit on that for people who might not have heard the podcast?
Yeah, because I think that when you automatically say, okay, oh, I hated this, it was terrible, like then people kind of pile on you, especially in a place like Twitter, and accuse you of being like unimaginative, or you're kind of like, oh, you're just like a bonehead wrestling fan and you just want to see this or that. Look, like I said in there, and not to get all hoity-toity about it, I'm a teacher. I have a master's degree. I'm not like, wrestling isn't the only thing I like. I go to museums. I like Andy Warhol movies, okay? all that stuff is cool. When I turn on wrestling, that's not what I'm looking for. It's like I said something at one point. I think it might have been on the last podcast. Look, it would be like, or if they took the two quarterbacks in a Super Bowl, they put them in the middle of the field, and they had like a discussion about transcendental meditation. You know, look, I'm very interested in transcendental meditation. I love Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm not watching the Super Bowl though for that. And it's the same thing with this. You know, that's just not what I was into seeing. Now, look, it was very well produced. It was actually entertaining. I'll give you that. Great. I thought it would have worked really well as a way to build up the actual match, like a vignette or something to get you interested. Oh, Bray Wyatt is getting inside John Cena's head. What's going to happen when they actually like get in the ring, you know? But to just say, well, that's the match. Like that was what just happened, you know? And I think like the thing with me where, and Al, I'm going to try to give you a glimmer of hope here, because I know that on Twitter, it felt like we were definitely in the minority on that, and it feels like it's passing you by. But I think like with so many things, I don't know how much of an accurate barometer Twitter actually is, because I have a feeling, hear me out on this, if there was a live crowd, 80,000 people, whatever it is, and they played that on the monitor there for a live crowd, I'm going to say that I do not think the response would be exactly warm by that live crowd. And it would be, I mean, I may be wrong, but I'm feeling like maybe there are a lot of people out there that aren't on Twitter that were just like, what in the world did I just watch right now? I don't know. It's hard to say, but it could be the future of wrestling. I mean, like if you showed people from 40 years ago the average wrestling match now, right? They would just, it would be almost unrecognizable to them to watch like an episode of Raw, let's say. They'd be like, how is this even a wrestling show? So it makes me think like in 20 years from now, are matches like that going to be kind of the norm? I don't think it's that out of the realm of possibility. Is it what I want to see? No, but you know, it could be.
But if I can jump in here, so there is a happy medium, and I think to Brian's point, and me being a lot less of an intellectual than Brian, you could take the 3 hours of Monday night on USA and just put on hardcore pornography, right? And there are going to be people who enjoy that, right? And they'll like it more than they like Raw every week, but it's not wrestling. Right? Or you can just put a movie on.
It depends which ones you watch.
Yes, there are some genres, granted. Or you could put a football game on, or you could put a movie on, and people will like it more than wrestling, but it's not wrestling. So I think that's my biggest issue, specifically with the Firefly Funhouse match, was that it just didn't resemble wrestling at all. I've come around a little bit on the Boneyard match. At the very least, what we got there was a fight, and to me, at its core, that's what wrestling should be, is a presentation of a simulated fight. And I think one thing that nobody's brought up is, as far as that happy medium, and is there a way to do this that works, that takes advantage of some innovations in presentation and technology and makes the best of a bad situation without an audience being present? And the answer is yes. And that answer was Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa on Wednesday night, the third kind of forgotten cinematic match of the week. That it came after the other two, I think, hurt it some. And I think in isolation, if that's the only one that we saw, people would have been a lot higher about it than it was. It was also hurt by them repeating a lot of the stuff that Edge and Orton did in their match at WrestleMania. But I saw that match, and I absolutely thought this could be the future of wrestling. I didn't love that match, but I liked a lot about the presentation of that match. If you watch Dark Side of the Ring, and they have kind of like the very dramatic, smoky room kind of images, sure. It was sort of a whole match shot that way. But in the universe of pro wrestling, completely acceptable. It was just a match that was shot differently than you would shoot another match. And I think they were careful, and I actually liked some of the innovations they did. Again, in terms of kind of, potentially this whole situation with the coronavirus leading to some outside the box thinking and maybe some even improvements in the product. One thing that they did there that I think they did better than at WrestleMania is use some clever editing to make some bumps look maybe worse than they were while protecting some wrestlers. There was a spot where I think they both came off the top turn post and took a bump out to the ring floor. And it was apparent to me that they shot that in two different shots. And when they actually made impact with the arena floor, it was from a lower height than the top. But it was cut together real well that you wouldn't immediately notice that. And I think stuff like that is great. It's like if you could avoid a wrestler taking an unnecessary bump. And that's the kind of stuff that you could do with the cinematic approach of wrestling. But at the end of the day, and this goes for every kind of presentation of wrestling, by and large, and it's not that I'm a total stick in the mud. I get stuff like Chikara and all that. But certainly, at least in WWE, I think for the benefit of consistency throughout the product, it's got to look at least a little bit like a fight, you know, and that was my biggest problem with it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, that certainly tracks. And one thing that sticks out for me, so our publisher, Stu Sachs, he was a little shy about coming on this. He doesn't like to draw too much attention to himself. But what he said to me was that he thinks it's reasonable that you could even like this style of match, but not necessarily like the execution of it. And I've actually read, and I haven't seen the Gargano Ciampa match yet, although I'm a huge fan of their matches in general. I think they do amazing stuff. Each match is a little different when they get in the ring with each other. A lot of people on Twitter who love the other matches were bashing that one. So it really does come down to taste at a certain point. And Al, I'm kind of curious. I mean, how did you view the Matt Hardy, the deletion matches, which actually at least ended in a pinfall and ultimately were matches in the traditional sense, although you could argue the Boneyard match was a buried alive match, so that at least, had a clear outcome.
Yeah. I'm mindful of there being a little bit of hypocrisy in all of this. I think that Matt Hardy did it in some ways, helped some people accept these others matches, and in other ways kind of hurt it because it's sort of like we've seen this already. It kind of looks like a ripoff. But I'll say that even the Matt Hardy matches didn't take it as far as the Firefly Funhouse match did, because as you touched on, Kevin, at the end of the day, it was a fight, right? I mean, what we were watching were, whether it was the matches with Matt Hardy or Bray Wyatt or whoever else, you were watching a fight in a certain setting, and it was documented by cameras. And I even thought, I think it was the Jeff Hardy one, the Ultimate Deletion, that they even took some steps that WWE didn't. If you remember, they showed the referee pulling up in his car to the Hardy compound. And I thought stuff like that was good attention to detail. And in that sense, I can very much give them a pass on the Boneyard match. I very much come around on it. Watching in real time, I didn't love it. But now, and again, when you take into account things like the limitations of The Undertaker, I very much get now why they did it the way they did it. And wouldn't argue with folks who really liked it very much. But again, it wasn't even, it was a skit, it was a vignette, the whole thing with Bray Wyatt. And I think one of the things that really irked me more than any of the rest of these is that watching that, it was so clear in the presentation that it required these two mortal enemies to work together, right? So Cena's got to change into all these different costumes, and he's got to play along. So it's hard to communicate in that storyline that this is how these two mortal enemies are settling the score, when clearly throughout they are working together. And this goes to something that Brian and I talked about on the podcast, and I think it's the one consistent thing I'm hearing over and over from defenders of these matches is that they appreciate the creativity. And I like creativity as much as the next guy, but in the context of a fight, nobody cares if you're creative or not. What you're looking for is rage and passion and all that. I always go back to Steve Austin, Bret Hart, WrestleMania 13. That's what a match between two people who hate each other is supposed to look like. And not to go too far afield here, but some of this was also apparent in the Randy Orton Edge match, where it seemed like they were more intent on getting points for creativity and innovation than they were just to communicate that these guys hate each other and want to hurt each other.
Well, I mean, if you look at this, this is a definite shift in the way wrestling is presented now. Like it or not, it has changed in that the bells and whistles, the sizzle on the steak, it is a lot more important than it's ever been. Again, for better or worse, everyone has different opinions about that, but it's undeniable. Mike, I talked to you about these matches, and you said you really think that this could be the future of pro wrestling. Now, I mean, is this a main event setup? Do you see wrestling shifting to like a pre-taped format in general? Like, what do you mean by the future of wrestling when you say that?
I think we'll see more of it, and that's as far as I can kind of go with that right now. And I think somebody somewhere will try to set up a wrestling endeavor that is all cinematic matches. And I would be curious, depending on how that's done, because I think a lot of indies are going to try to follow this. I've already seen some discussions of that. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that. TNA, or I guess it was Impact, when they did the Matt Hardy stuff, that was definitely kind of the trailblazer. I don't think a lot of people followed their lead in that. I don't think a lot of smaller companies tried to emulate that, but now we've got the top company saying, yeah, this is something not only that we've done on the quote unquote grandest stage, but yeah, we'll probably do it again. I think Triple H said something like that. So are we going to see a couple of those a year on the big four pay-per-views? Are we going to see those now and again on a Monday Night Raw? Probably. And it seems like they will be kind of used as kind of the climax to a feud, or the resolution, so to speak. Whether or not we get to a point where the main event of WrestleMania is a cinematic match, I will say it's hard for me to envision that, but certainly seeing more of these featured rather prominently in a large card, I think that's a very real thing. And I wouldn't be surprised that the talent is there. You look at an organization like Ring of Honor, and we've got an article in the next issue, as a matter of fact, an interview with Marty Scurll. The talent that he has and the brain for wrestling and the character that he's built would go great in one of these cinematic matches. There are going to be people that start to connect the dots and say, let's take this in-ring persona, this character, this vibe, and try to put it in this context. I'd like to see what that looks like.
Interesting. So, Brian, if this were to be kind of established, because part of your issue with this was that it was something that's kind of not established as something that's done, if that makes sense. It's sort of a left turn for wrestling. What if this becomes just another type of stipulation that ends a feud? Does your opinion about this soften if that's the case?
I think it can become that. But I think if it does become that, we have to kind of be aware of something here. So like the one thing that makes this different from any other development in wrestling before is that, if for the last century to century and a half, like the one thing that's unified professional wrestling, no matter how much it's changed and become unrecognizable from one generation to the next, is that it's live entertainment. Or it's a live, whatever you want to call it. It's a live show in front of an audience, in front of spectators, that's presented in the same way that a sporting event is presented, even if it's not a sporting event. So when you take this turn, right, then you're really taking it somewhere that it's never been before. And I think if it becomes more of a payoff for big matches, then what you're doing is you're really, this is the ultimate evolution of wrestling as entertainment, in the sense that like Al was saying, you can't really think about kayfabe anymore. You can't think about suspension of disbelief, because yes, Undertaker or even more, Bray Wyatt and John Cena, yes, they had to cooperate in order to put that match on, whatever it was. But like Rick Grimes and Negan on The Walking Dead, right? The actors, if you watch that show, the actors that play them, even though they're mortal enemies, they have to cooperate in order to shoot the scenes that they're shooting. And the reason they do that is because they're not really enemies. They're just performers playing a part. So it's almost like that's where this is going. And the average younger fan doesn't really seem to care about that. That, yes, of course they're performers playing a part. Like, of course, like what else did you think they were? Do you think they really hate each other? Of course they don't. Like, that's kind of like the prevailing view among fans of a certain generation. Like, it's silly. I mean, this is not my opinion, but it's silly to even have that pretense. Like, oh yeah, Bray Wyatt and John Cena, wow, they don't really hate each other. Big shock. Like, I think that's what how a lot of young fans view it. And even if I disagree, because I enjoy suspension of disbelief, it frees up the product and it frees up the fans to do way out in left field stuff like this, because you no longer have to maintain that illusion where we used to in the old days be like, well, how did they get in this situation? You have to do mental gymnastics, right? These young fans don't care about that. But I think if it keeps going that way, where it's like more and more matches, you may wind up eventually seeing wrestling that's no longer live entertainment, because that's the one thing you can't do, you know?
Right. So
Can I make one more quick point on that? It's you know, the live spectacle of it really has changed and decreased quite a bit the last couple of years, the number of people showing up to shows and so forth. So you do have the at-home audience and the online audience being the lion's share of who's watching the match. And I'll point this towards my buddy Al, who I know has been really critical in the past of, I think, Al, I've mentioned this to you before in other contexts, the trash can wrestling type thing. Would you rather see, sitting at home, a dog collar match or a battle at the edge of time? I would rather spend 15, 20 minutes watching these characters that I like do some kind of otherworldly battle at the edge of time for maybe the first and only time than a dog collar match or or some kind of Taipei death match.
Maybe a little unfair that you picked the most boring stipulation match in the entire book.
Yeah. No, that's coal miner's blood, Kevin.
I think the problem with that premise is that it's not an issue of which is more entertaining or which I would prefer more, but it's an issue of which one belongs under the banner of wrestling. I'd rather watch a great movie than both of those. I'd rather watch an episode of Breaking Bad than both of those, but it's not wrestling. So you're right. I mean, you could slowly chip away at what the definition of wrestling is. And right, well, maybe you don't need an audience. Maybe you don't need to shoot it in real time. You can cut it up in post-editing. Maybe you don't need a ring. Maybe you don't need wrestlers to wear trunks. Maybe you don't need pinfalls or a referee. And with each thing that you're stripping away, it's not even a matter of better or worse. It's just, well, this isn't even recognizable to what wrestling is anymore. We're just talking about a different form of entertainment. And I think part of that is what WWE wants. I mean, there's always been, I think, among the McMahons, a little bit of disdain for being wrestling promoters. So I do think that they want to branch out. But this might come off as just as an insult, and maybe it is, but the point is, if they try to be more than they are, if they try to just be, I've been binge watching Breaking Bad here in quarantine with my family, and I've seen it before, but I saw it in real time before over years and years and years, and now we've gotten through 5 seasons in whatever it's been, 2 weeks, and so I have a different appreciation for the nuance of storytelling and how things that they set up in season 1 start paying off in season 5. And just the careful craftsmanship. And WWE can't remember what they did last week, right? In terms of storylines. So the idea that they can create, this high art concept, cinematic wrestling storytelling, I just don't buy it. And so I think wrestling fans put aside everything else, right, about whether this belongs on a wrestling show or not. I also think it just wasn't that good. The Firefly Funhouse. I don't think it was that clever. I don't think it was that well shot. I don't think it was that well written. I don't think it was that well acted. It was different, and I think fans give it a lot of points for being different and for innovation. But if you were judging it next to a Breaking Bad or any other show on network television, it would fall way short.
Well, I mean, I think the reason I brought up Twin Peaks season 3 is just because it's, apart from being, again, a big Twin Peaks dork, is that it wasn't linear, and it was like a lot of unresolved issues, a lot of like stream of consciousness. And I think this is what this was. It was really more like a weird art film, like Brian said on the podcast. So I mean, it is different, and you can absolutely look at that and be like, this is crap, I like story. And that's valid, just as it's valid to say I like this really oddball crap that hardly makes sense. You know, I want Tim and Eric wrestling, basically. That's okay. If people want that, that's what they want. I think there's room out there. And I understand people who want the more traditional stuff too. Brady, I'm just going to give you a tough question. Does kayfabe matter anymore in 2020?
You know, I've been struggling with that for 20 years now. There was an episode of
No, he finally gets to talk.
There was an episode of like Raw from like probably 10 years ago, I remember, and like Dolph Ziggler got hit on the head, and I vaguely remember like the little cartoon birds kind of flying around his head in post production. Like, to me, I mean, what was your question?
Does kayfabe matter in 2020?
Does it matter? I mean, I like to think that it matters, and I think that there's a certain segment of the fans that certainly still buy into it. But I mean, by and large, no. I mean, it's pretty much over, unfortunately. Just my opinion. But I mean, they've been building to this for years, so. Does
anybody lament the death of kayfabe here?
I have a thought on that, actually, because I think it doesn't, the reason that kayfabe worked so well, right, is because it got people emotionally invested, right? So if you're getting people emotionally invested, I guess that's the most important thing, no matter how you're getting there. But here's the problem. I feel like Al and I talked about Lucha Underground on the podcast, and now I thought, and people may be surprised to hear me say this, but Lucha Underground, when they were doing their thing, I thought was the best wrestling product out there, right? So how can I reconcile those two things? It was because Lucha Underground was consistent, and we said that. That was what they did. That was what their show was. When WWE mixes it up like this, I think it sort of muddies the water. So if you're trying to get emotionally invested, and part of the show, they're working hard to convince you that you're watching real things, and then another part of the show, they're just like, this is just wrestling. We're having fun. What are you getting so worked up about? It's hard to, it's like you're getting whiplash from the tonal shift of what's going on. So so like, it would be like, you know, I'm trying to think of other TV shows than Walking Dead in case people don't watch them. I don't know, whatever, like Sopranos. If Tony Soprano in the middle of like one of his therapy sessions just kind of turned to the camera and just gave a wink like that, it's like it takes you right out of the whole damn show, because yeah, I know he's James Gandolfini, but I'm suspending disbelief for an hour. I know he's an actor playing a part, but don't rub my face in it. Don't be like, this is scripted entertainment, dummy. Like, you're a mark for like getting emotionally involved in this. That's where I disagree. Like, if you know, kayfabe, there could be levels of kayfabe. At least, you know, like, don't rub it in my face that I'm watching, you know, like a scripted show. You know, you can still have entertainment and not be like, oh, you have to still be in your character when you're on the Tonight Show. Like, you don't have to do that. Like, there can be levels of kayfabe, is what I'm saying.
Interesting.
Yeah, I very much agree. And you know, one of the arguments I hate the most in defense of not just this, but anything in wrestling, and you hear it a lot from WWE officials, is you can't insult the fans' intelligence, right? That whole thing. And it's so backwards because, and granted, we're all going to disagree, but I had my intelligence insulted watching the Firefly Funhouse match. And it's, again, it's not that I don't understand that this is scripted entertainment or anything like that. But yeah, I think Brian said it best. I mean, there needs to be, I feel like, a set of parameters in the presentation. I too like Lucha Underground because they're consistent throughout. And I don't know if you guys watch the Deadpool movies. I love the Deadpool movies, and they very much break down the fourth wall all the time. But that's the way that they tell their story. I mean, if you got that in the middle of an Avengers movie or you know, a Martin Scorsese movie or something like that, well, it depends on the movie, I guess, it would take you out of it. Or a Broadway play, right? I mean, if you go watch whatever, the Phantom of the Opera on Broadway, and in the middle of it they break character, it would take you out of it. So you know, if WWE decides today, going forward, we are the Cinematic Wrestling Federation, and this is going to be our presentation for everything, then I think a lot of this becomes more acceptable. But right, I mean, after we saw the Firefly Funhouse match, on Sunday night. We went right to Brock Lesnar and Drew McIntyre in a standard match inside the ring with the referee. Yeah, it was whiplash, like Brian said.
Yeah, I think that was really that was strange too, because I think one of the reasons the Boneyard match worked so well for me is because it was this great conclusion to WrestleMania. It felt big and epic and appropriate for Undertaker. And it, you know, it was almost like everything else was building up to this, and then you shifted over to this world. There's a reason they didn't have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they wouldn't have had a deletion match open up Impact and then go back to the ring for an X Division title match. So I definitely hear you there. I would actually like, because I think we've been, if not critical of the concept of this, critical of the execution of it. I would like to end on a slight defense of it. That's not going to come from me. I'm going to shoot back to Mike for it. But before I do that, does anyone have anything else to add about this generally that hasn't been said? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I go back and forth. I think this kind of stuff is fine in doses. Is it okay for the second to last match on WrestleMania? In my opinion, no. Is it any different than what they did with Billionaire Ted and the Huckster and the Nacho Man? In my opinion, no. It's fine for what it is. You don't hear people critiquing the Nacho Man against the Huckster, where they both had a heart attack in the middle of the ring to end it. You know, you kind of accept it for what it is. You look at it for what it is, and you don't try and make more out of it than it really is. And in my opinion, if you can do that and still have quality wrestling on the show, I think that's what matters most.
All right. Okay, good. Well, Mike, I want to shoot back to you. So for the skeptics out there, defend this kind of wrestling and the place that it holds going forward.
I think it was Brian's kind of premise here that maybe this is part of wrestling as entertainment. Maybe this is the evolution of wrestling as entertainment. And if we were to go back and even look at wrestling from the dawn of the spectacle, it would look very different from how it looked in Memphis in the 1980s and WCW in the 1990s and so forth. There's different eras, and I think we're maybe crossing over into a different era. These things have been, pro wrestling has been kind of testing this out for some time. One of the ways that I've had a lot of fun processing this with you guys is some of the comparisons to television. I think about, when we talk about breaking the fourth wall or kind of winking off to the side, I think about The Office. The Office had levels of suspension of disbelief or appreciating this show within a show kind of idea. And maybe there's a little bit of that going on. I think if anybody here is a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan, there was the great episode where, Larry David was in the on-stage production of The Producers and totally lost. Was it The Producers? Anybody remember that show? Lost his place in the middle of the episode, totally went off script, started doing kind of a stand-up observational kind of thing. They thought it was going to destroy the show, totally turned the show around, and it was this new thing that everybody embraced. Fictional, I know, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of maybe a counterpoint to some of the things we've talked about. At the end of the day, I think one of the best comparisons to a television event and WrestleMania being an entirely cinematic production start to finish this year. That's what it was. There's so much production, post-production, things like that, different than anything we've ever seen. Reminds me a lot of the Simpsons episode where they had the film festival. And everybody in Springfield made their own kind of, somebody used the phrase art film earlier. The question becomes, I think, among wrestling fans, is this Barney Gumbel's art film that won the contest? Or was it man getting hit in the groin by a football?
Well, as we all know, man getting hit by a football wound up being remade as a George C. Scott movie, and he did win the Oscar for it. So that kind of worked out. All right, so gentlemen, thank you for joining me for this, and let's do it again soon. And watching this at home or wherever you are, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the PWI Weekly, and most importantly, subscribe to Pro Wrestling Illustrated, 50% off the cover price. If you're buying 3 magazines all year, you know, if you normally buy the 500, the women's 100, the year-end awards, already you're saving. So go ahead and do it, and let us know what you think in the comments, and try and be nice about it.